peers, the swindlers, the men in high and low places that seek bribes and demand 10%, those that seek to keep the country divided permanently so that they can remain in office as ministers or VIPs at least, the tribalists, the nepotists, those that make the country look big for nothing before international circles, those that have corrupted our society and put the Nigerian political calendar back by their words and deeds. Like good soldiers we are not promising anything miraculous or spectacular. But what we do promise every law-abiding citizen is freedom from fear and all forms of oppression, freedom from general inefficiency, and freedom to live and strive in every field of human endeavor, both nationally and internationally. We promise that you will no more be ashamed to say that you are Nigerians. I leave you with a message of good wishes and ask for your support at all times so that our land, watered by the Niger and Benue, between the sandy waste and Gulf of Guinea, washed in salt by the almighty Atlantic, shall not distract Nigerians from gaining sway in any great aspect of international endeavor. My dear countrymen, this is the end of this speech. I wish you all good luck, and I hope you will cooperate to the fullest in this job which we have set for ourselves of establishing a prosperous nation and achieving solidarity. Thank you very much, and goodbye for now. So that was the broadcast of the man, Kaduna Unzeogu. But it was never to be. I'll take, what do you call it, tea break. So it's been a long read, and it's still going to be longer. So I am thinking that maybe when we finish this chapter, let me see how many of it is left. So when we finish this chapter, the end of revolution, it's actually long. This may take me another hour, by the way. So when that is finished, we can then go to chapter 6. And you know something, chapter 6 is all about me in Rossi after the revolution. So that is when, if the time is fair enough, I could take calls, okay? Like get our reactions, okay? Where you can react to all of these as we normally do on Mayegun's Diary Politico, okay? So I think I should get on with it, right? Go on. Oh dear. Thank you. So let us continue now. After that broadcast, brethren, the writer continues. The content of this broadcast are clear and need no further elaboration. Suffice is to say that they showed that the revolution was duly born and that it was capable of being nurtured to life in the competent hands of some of those who conceived it and labored for it. One second. Anyway, so but if the revolution child was turned into a stillborn, it was because the water of the world into which it was born became poisonous to it and killed it. This brave and powerful broadcast had the effect of according full credibility to the revolution, while at the same time it damnified the bigotry of Ironsi and his reactionary clique. Having achieved this much, Unzeogu was quick to make plans for the control of the remainder of Nigeria. To execute this plan, by the morning of 16th January, he called a conference of all the officers in Kaduna to give them his orders. First, he divided all his troops into 3 crack task forces. The first task force was to move north and take Zaria and Kano, to consolidate his control of those areas, to make the forces therein available for his southern operations. The second task was to advance southwest through Jeba to Ibadan. It was to take Ibadan and prepare the ground for launching into Lagos. The third task force was to advance southeast to Enugu through Makurdi. It was to take Enugu and launch southwest to take Benin and to hold the two regions firmly for the revolution. This was an excellent plan, revolutionary in principle and perfectly tactical in concept. There was no doubt that this plan would have succeeded completely. For one thing, success in such a movement and as such movement was always on the side of the revolutionaries. Secondly, the morale of the participating officers and men was extremely high and conducive to success. Thirdly, all attempts by Ironsi to fight the revolutionaries would have failed woefully because the nation itself was jubilant that the coup had been staged and that peace had returned to the country. The acting president of the Federation, Dr. Nwafo Orizu, could not appoint a substitute prime minister since he did not know the fate of Alhaji Abubakar. Ministers were ready to hand over government of the Federation to the armed forces. Everybody everywhere in the Federation rejoiced at the overthrow of Balewa government and toasted the revolutionaries. University students throughout the Federation hailed Nzeogu and the revolutionaries. These were proofs that the revolution was popular. Unfortunately, it was at this stage that the revolution proved most unlucky. For as soon as Nzeogu finished his orders, and before the officers dispersed to prepare for the battle, Major Madebo sought Nzeogu's attention and impressed it on him that the revolutionary battle was very unnecessary. He argued that since Ironsi had accepted the coup as a fait accompli, it was all that Nzeogu could wish for. He insisted that Nzeogu would be demonstrating an unbridled lust for power if he launched his proposed attack. He advised Nzeogu to cancel his plan and surrender to Ironsi, who would gladly carry out Nzeogu's revolutionary plans. But it was an act of deceit. Madiebo was being mischievous. He did not reveal to Nzeogu that he was in constant contact with Ironsi and Gowon, who had both instructed him to destroy Nzeogu's revolution. He pretended to be talking in earnest to Nzeogu and posed to be a friend of the revolution. By this, Madiebo showed himself as an enemy of a revolutionary Nigeria. This was the reason why an officer of Madiebo caliber did not reach the peak of his career and outputs except in the tribal and reactionary war of Ojukwu in Biafra. Madiebo acted as an instrument for Ojukwu and helped the latter to prolong the dreadful and wasteful war, which did nothing but destroy the cream of the Igbo race. I say this much because the initial wave of success in Kaduna was soon depressed by the reactionaries, headed in this case by Madiebo. He, in collaboration with Ironsi and Gowon, worked to extinguish the light of the revolution. Nzeogu took Madiebo's deceit for good advice, stood down the troops, and cancelled the plan. The reactionaries recorded success only at the barracks, where they, in effect, staged a palace coup against the revolution. It was in this way that Ironsi usurped the revolution to his advantage and put some of the revolutionary officers to flight. Madiebo was destroying Nzeogu's will to fight, not on the battlefield where he could never have succeeded, but right at his military headquarters where he, Nzeogu, expected to be talking to another revolutionary officer, his own comrade in arms, but rather, unfortunately, he was talking to a wolf in sheep's skin, an enemy who behaved as a friend and who had the avowed intention of getting a quick and tidy end to Nzeogu's revolution. Later on the 16th, when it was becoming obvious that Ojukwu was not faithful to the revolution, Nzeogu requested Madiebo to go to Kaduna, both to collect money for the troop and to speak to Ojukwu. Madiebo tactfully turned down the request and suggested that a junior officer should be sent. Nzeogu agreed and sent Captain Ude The latter was promptly arrested by Ojukwu. Nzeogu's natural reaction was to send a crack force under the command of Major Tim Onwuatuegu to knock some sense into the head of Ojukwu in Kano. This force was ready by the first light of the 17th. It was well armed and provided with adequate supporting weapons and transport. It had got ready to go forth when Madiebo sighted it and intervened against it. To the detriment of the revolution, he suggested that the force should be stopped and that he himself would speak to Ojukwu and obtain the release of Ude. It was another most dreadful blow against the development of the revolutionary spirit and power in Nigeria. If the Kano exploits had gone forth, it would have been successful. It would have dealt a blow to the bigotry of Ojukwu, and revisionists of his ilk would have learned their lesson. More than that, it would have boosted the morale of the corps of budding revolutionaries under the leadership of Nzeogu. The aspirations contrasted with those of the reactionaries, who were materialistic, tribalistic, and jingoistic. These same people, some 20 months later, were bombing, shelling, and destroying the people of Eastern Nigeria under the leadership of General Yakubu Gowon. This same Madiebo, who had earlier refused to go to Kano for the sake of the revolution, later agreed to act for the sake of Ojukwu, or rather for the sake of reaction, because the revolutionaries had been put to shame. With this, the palace coup against the revolution had succeeded almost completely. One more pressure, and the revolutionary child will breathe its last. The Nigeria Air Force. A word cannot but be said about the Nigerian Air Force and the part it played in the revolution. The Air Force was launched in 1963 when 4 army officers and a few cadets formed the nucleus of its officer corps. By late 1964, it had acquired a few Dornier 27 aircraft, which were small tactical planes. With this, it had started to join in various military exercises. This included the Maiduguri exercises of October 1964, the Makurdi anti-TV operations of 1965, the battle group training exercises of October 1965, and the similar missions. Up till late 1965, the aircraft were mainly flown by German officers, while young Nigerian Air Force pilots were being trained. That same year, the Air Force acquired a few German transport planes for the movement of troops and stores. On the day that the revolution was born in Kaduna, the young Nigerian Air Force pilots were prompt to respond to the quickening tempo of the spirit in the north. These young officers flew their tactical planes around and dominated the airspace of Kaduna in solidarity with Nzeogu and in support of the revolution. They flew as far as Zaria and Kano to show the flag of the revolution. At the instance of Nzeogu, they prepared to participate in the military operation plan to take control of the south. They were to give support to ground forces and to use transport planes to convey combat forces, supporting weapons and vehicles to the battle areas. They would have done a lot to bring success to the cause of the revolution. And as the Kaduna base was the only Air Force base in those days, our forces would have dominated the air throughout Nigeria. Forces among the young Air Force officers was Lieutenant Amuchenwa, who led and encouraged other young officers to the utter discomfiture of their German trainers. They showed themselves capable of taking their aircraft into battle. The last straw. As was pointed out above, it required the exertion of only a little pressure for the revolutionary child to capitulate. This last pressure was exerted by Madiebo. Later on the 17th, after the Kano operation had been called off, after having successfully, on 3 previous occasions, diverted Nzeogu from his course, Madiebo took liberty for license and drove his dagger home. He made Nzeogu feel that to pursue his revolutionary aim aims against Nrosi would smell of personal ambition, and he wanted Nzeogu to believe that such an ambition was not the aim of the revolution. He put it to Nzeogu as if the army was always the same army, no difference in principle, no difference in objectives, no difference in method. He spoke as if Nrosi was synonymous with Nzeogu and as if both were interchangeable. He completely ignored the truth that revolution was totally different from reaction and that Nzeogu was totally different from Nrosi. He ignored the truth that he himself was acting on instructions that were destructive to the person, principle, and the forces that Nzeogu stood for. He pretended as if he was acting on his own initiative, as if he was acting on a principle of sincerity, and as if he meant well for Nzeogu and his revolutionary forces. It was a combination of trickery, flattery, deception, and beguilement. Unfortunately for the revolution, while this last and destructive pressure was being asserted, Anuforo and I, both of whom would have abated the pressure by preventing Adewale from influencing Nzeogu, were only a few miles away, slowly making it towards Kaduna by train. What happened to us in Lagos had so beaten us hollow that we were rather disoriented. By the time that we got to Enugu early on the 16th and heard that Nzeogu had succeeded in Kaduna, it did not dawn on us that he might need our help and support very badly. It did not occur to us that a lot of initiative was still to be taken by the revolutionary forces and that such initiative might be lost if we did not make Kaduna in time. Nrosi had already taken control of Enugu and posted Lieutenant Colonel Ejo there early on the 15th. Ejo had already taken over both the government of Eastern Nigeria and the control of all the troops there. That was a lot faster than we had anticipated, and we realized that Nrosi was moving fast to cash in on our success. We knew very little about the extent of Nzeogu's success. Little did we realize that he was thirsty for our moral, military, and psychological support. Therefore, rather than commandeer a vehicle and make it post-haste to Kaduna, we entered a late afternoon train and inched our way up north, arriving early on the 18th, but too late. By that time, Adewale, acting on instructions from Nrosi and Gowon, had pressed Nzeogu into agreeing to hand over power to Nrosi. Adewale did not work alone. He found a useful ally in Lieutenant Colonel Nwawo, the Nigerian Army attaché in London, who was specially flown down to speak to Nzeogu. Nwawo had been a known friend of Nzeogu, but he belonged to the old brigade of officers who grew from the ranks. In short, he was Nrosi's type and did not grasp the principle of the revolution. He made it out as if he came to Nzeogu as a friend and was speaking in the national interest. He pretended as if he carried a message of truth from Nrosi, when in fact it was merely being used as an instrument of decoy, deceit, bad faith, and revision. He invoked his long-standing friendship with Nzeogu and won his ear, though not his heart. By the evening of 17th of January, Nzeogu had agreed to hand over power to Nrosi and to follow Nwawo to Lagos. Before he did, he laid down 5 conditions which were to be fulfilled to enable him to cooperate with Nrosi. These were a guarantee of safety for himself, his officers, and all men who took part in the January 15 revolution. B, a guarantee for them of freedom from legal prosecution then or at any later time. C, compensation to be paid to the families of all officers and men who lost their lives during the coup. D, the release of all officers and men who were detained in the South. E, the assurance that the people whom we fought to remove would not be returned to office. These 5 conditions were accepted by Nrosi on the phone and were personally accepted on his behalf by Nwawo, whom he had sent specially for this purpose, and particularly to assure Nzeogu of his personal safety in Lagos. Nzeogu had made up his mind to leave for Lagos before Anoforo and I surfaced at the Kaduna officers' mess early on the 18th. Nzeogu was shocked to see us because rumors had it that we had all been killed in Lagos. He briefed us on past events by saying we had a plan to attack South to destroy the forces of reaction. I jumped for joy and interjected, "Thanks heaven, let's go." But we had stepped down. He retorted, and another cold stream ran down my spine. It was the second since 15th, and my rising hope was lost again. Then Nzeogu went through the events as they happened. He highlighted this moment of triumph, and as he overcame the maneuver of Sardauna, he stressed the depth of his anguish when he heard that we were all killed down south. He expressed his reluctance to negotiate with a man like Ironsi. Then he emphasized his loneliness when he heard no more revolutionary voices around him, but voices of reaction and revisionism. To sum it all up, he had been through the height of happiness and the depth of despair in the last 4 days. And the result was that he was now ready to hand over the reign of the government of the North to the newly appointed military governor, Major, now promoted Lieutenant Colonel, Hassan U. Katsina. I had had enough shocks in the previous 4 days, so I simply laughed. The first person to reap the benefit of the palace school was Major Hassan. He had now been promoted and had also been given a princely kingdom. How would he use these opportunities? To finish the revolution and wipe out his memory? I laughed again. Events mock at human foresight, and nothing is certain but the unforeseen. I recalled. For the next 2 days, I stayed very warmly with my friend Nzeogu in the same officers' mess building, which we both shared before. Well, that's a little bit kind of a touchy, by the way. Anyway, which we both shared before I left for Abeokuta in September 1965. This time, there were 4 of us sharing the 2 rooms. While I paired with Anoforo in my former room, Nzeogu paired with Obasanjo in his own room. Obasanjo had just arrived back in Nigeria on the 17th after a military course in India. He was full of praise and admiration for Nzeogu and for all the officers and men of the revolution. He believed that it was a high-level achievement in spite of our loss of the South to Ironsi and our subsequent failure to take over the government of the Federation. Obasanjo regretted that he was not around to have taken part in the revolution. Certainly, he gave us his unqualified support and hope with us that things might yet turn in our favor if Nzeogu was truly given a chance to participate in the military government in Lagos. It is a real shame that the same Obasanjo who expressed his support for the revolution in 1966 had turned around and written damnable things about Nzeogu, with whom he used to share the same bed, and the January 15 revolution. There are other instances in his book in which Obasanjo maligned and damaged the reputation of his closest friends and associates, but history will never forgive him. The end of the revolution. What Ironsi promised Nzeogu was that the latter would be co-opted into the military government in Lagos so that he would have a hand in the reshaping of the destiny of Nigeria. If this promise had been kept, Nzeogu would have seen to it that all of us regained our position in the army and that we also took part in bringing revolutionary ideas to the government. In such a case, revisionism and reaction would have been curtailed, and the repercussions of inactions that occurred under the regime of Ironsi would have been staved off. But Ironsi had no intention of keeping his promise to Nzeogu, and he never did. Before Nzeogu left Kaduna, we appraised the situation and agreed that all would not be lost if he partook of the military government in Lagos. We also agreed that all would not be lost if Ironsi observed the 5 conditions agreed upon. Therefore, we all shared a note of optimism before Nzeogu left the mess on the morning of the 20th. for the brigade headquarters in Kaduna. After the brigade headquarters, a short ceremony was staged. There was a parade. Nzegu took the salute and formally handed over the reins of government of northern Nigeria to Lieutenant Colonel Azan Katsina. It was a public ceremony. The press, the radio, and the television were present. Together with the world press, Azan made a brief speech in praise of Nzegu. He lauded the selflessness of his fight and principles. He also promised to stand by those principles and purpose for which Nzegu fought. After that, he embraced Nzegu, and both of them parted as comrades in arms. Nzegu went from there to the airport and flew to Lagos. But as he landed in Lagos, unlike the warm embrace that Azan gave him, and contrary to all the assurances given on the telephone and personally through Colonel Nwawo, Nzegu landed into the harsh, cold, menacing embrace of guns. A whole 84 mm Carl Gustav anti-tank recoilless rifle, the type that he had used to destroy Sardaunia's castle, was mounted upon a Land Rover and was fully charged and cocked and pointed at him. In addition, several machine guns and rifles were also mounted and cocked and pointed at him. Even if Nzegu had a plane full of armed soldiers to fight for him, he would still have found himself fully overwhelmed by the amount of weapons that were got ready for him in Lagos. Whereas Nzegu had simply traveled in non-combat military dress and completely unarmed. Even Nwawo, who promised Nzegu a heaven of safety, was now ashamed that he had brought his so-called friend into this shameful situation. Of course, there is no value in a promise made by an enemy. Ironsi and Gowon organized those hardware of a welcome, and thereby showed themselves to be paramount and incorrigible enemies of the revolution. Nzegu behaved himself and was not shot. He was escorted straight from the airport to the maximum security prison in Kirikiri to join those officers and men of his revolution who had already been arrested, beaten up, tortured, and detained there. With the arrest and detention of Nzegu, the revolution could be said to have ended. What remained was the hunt for the few members of the revolution who were still in freedom. This included Anuforo and myself. We were still in Kaduna, but did not resume our military duties because we were being hunted for detention. Also hunted were Onwatuegu and Ude, both of whom had resumed their normal duties at the NMTC Kaduna. Ifeajuna was also at large. Unknown to us at that time, he had driven straight from the Federal Guards Officers' Mess towards Abeokuta without waiting at our rendezvous. Having passed Ota, he stopped somewhere along the road, took the arrested Prime Minister into the bush, and had him shot. After that, he drove straight to Enugu, where he parked his Mercedes-Benz car and bade farewell to Don Okafor. Then, a personal friend of his and poet, Chris Okigbo, was said to have driven him to the Nigerian Dahomey border, which is close to Lagos, from where he journeyed to Ghana. In Ghana, he was received in audience by Osagiefo Kwame Nkrumah, who was said to have been delighted that the feudalistic and retrogressive Balewa government of Nigeria had been overthrown. He therefore gave Ifeajuna political asylum and lodged him with Sam G. Ikoku, who himself was a fugitive from the tyranny of the Balewa government. It was not until Nkrumah had been overthrown by the Afrifa coup of February 24, 1966, and a new military government, which was friendly to the Ironsi government of Nigeria, came to power, that Ifeajuna was forced out and returned to Nigeria. By then, all his revolutionary colleagues had been detained, and Ifeajuna was sent to jail to join us in detention. It was Ifeajuna's unilateral, personal, and short-sighted flight to Ghana that made the propagandists of Gowon's regime to spread the false notion that our coup was sponsored by Ghana. But nothing could be further from the truth. Much as many of us admire the militant anti-imperialism and pan-Africanism of Dr.